This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your fridge with a pussy magnet.
Welcome, my lovely lumps. Or should I say lovely labs? I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge. We're going to yarn about all things sexuality, womanhood, relationships, intimacy, holistic health, and everything in between. Your legs. Ooh, can't help myself. Anyway, we're going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up, you're about to receive the sex ed that you never had and have a bloody good laugh while you're at it. Before we dive in, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. It's an absolute privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content in Naarm, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if you're ready, let's flap and do this. Oh my God, is there such thing as too many vagina jokes in the one intro? Whatever, it's my podcast. I'm leaving it in.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up a couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hey, my lovely lumps. So this is a bit of an interesting episode. It's a kind of follow-on from the previous episode where Toey and I had some tub talks in the outdoor fire bath, and I heard a story about him hiring a sex worker for the first time. And within that episode, there was a whole lot of stuff that I felt a little bit iffy about publishing. I was kind of like, oh, there was a moment that felt like probably a bit racist. There was moments that made me uncomfortable, and I had to sort of halt Toey and his storytelling to kind of interject and say, I don't know if that's going to fly right now. And it was kind of an interesting experience because I felt like in the moment, as things came up, we sort of navigated that, but at the same time, a lot of the really valuable kind of unpacking and dissecting of those things that felt like a bit of an edge for me to talk about or to publish on the podcast all occurred afterwards in voicey form between Toey and I. We sent a fair few voice memos back and forth, just kind of unpacking it further. He was kind of questioning why I felt like some of the things he was saying weren't okay or didn't sit well with me. I was also trying to figure out what it was that sort of stuck in my craw so much about some of those things. And I also sent the episode before sending it out into the world to a friend of mine, Chloe, who I really respect. Their opinion is just so informed and so thoughtful and balanced. And so I just thought, okay, I'm going to run it by Chloe. I had a chat with a couple of different friends and sort of explained the issues that I had and got their thoughts on it. And within this process, and this happens sometimes I'll have an episode and I'll just be like, oh, there's a few things in there that I don't know about putting that out, or I might need to unpack that a bit and sort of just get some trusted friends' thoughts on it before I publish it, because I take this really seriously, and the podcast is my baby and I want to always be giving value and doing the best job that I can. So every now and then there'll be an episode that's particularly crunchy or something will arise and I'll have to really think about it and probably do a lot of extra editing, and I'll usually send it to a few friends and just say, hey, I want your thoughts on this before I release it. And this was a big one of those because it's definitely the most vulnerable podcast I've probably ever put out, for me at least. I felt quite confronted and uncomfortable and vulnerable at the thought of releasing it. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of meat in there. I think that's, an edge that I'm pretty excited to push of my own. And so after a whole lot of, deliberating and back and forthing, I just sort of thought, oh my God, all of these voices are actually just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the original podcast episode. And I thought maybe it would make sense to then also release this as a bit of a follow-up in case you're interested. And also to see an example of just some really beautiful and mature communication when there's a disagreement and when things are, tiptoeing into some pretty delicate territory. I was quite proud of Toey and myself, how we unpacked it together, and we were both really open to learning from the other person and seeing one another's perspective and kind of coming to a place of understanding and being on the same page. And so, yeah, I just thought, all right, let's make an episode of this. So the audio is pretty shitty. It's just voices from my phone played into the microphone. I couldn't figure out a better way of doing that because it was all just sort of happening on Messenger. And so apologies for that. I have also sort of interjected throughout as I've edited it together. It was a bit of a nightmare to try to get the timeline correct, because I was messaging Chloe and I was also messaging Toey. Oh, Toey and Chloe. So I've done my best to make it cohesive and get the timeline all to sort of sync up, but forgive me if it feels a little bit difficult to follow. I hope that's not the case. And I basically sent the episode to Chloe, got their thoughts, and this episode starts with Chloe's response and one or two messages that I'd gotten from Toey, and then it sort of finishes with a long back and forth exchange between Toey and I, where he's sort of asking for an explanation about why I didn't feel comfortable or want to publish some of the stuff that he was saying, because he didn't see anything wrong with it. And I'm kind of trying to explain what I felt wasn't cool about it, for me and potentially for my listeners. So basically, I would love to hear any of your thoughts. If you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I have something to add, or I have a perspective that might be helpful, that would be like so valuable to me, because I really, this episode and last episode, we kind of talked a lot about like my relationship with the podcast and with my listener base, and the fact that it's so important for me to be putting out content that's serving my listeners and that is relatable. And I also am not 100% sure if I'm on the right track all the time. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if anyone, feels any strong reactions to what happened in the podcast last episode or this episode, I'd love to hear from you. So I hope you get something from this. I thought that, and it's so often the case where I'll record a conversation and then it's this sort of follow-on conversations that happen with friends or listeners afterwards that even more of the juice happens when we're unpacking things and we're kind of elaborating on ideas and we're sort of, verbalizing our thought processes and nutting out things. I often think, oh God, I wish I could have recorded that conversation. So I guess this is my attempt to just see if this is something that's also, received well and that's valuable to you. Like, this is not my normal podcast format. This isn't the usual sort of content, but it did feel very on brand. And I imagine that only the real diehards will kind of get this far and listen to this, but that's totally okay with me. And I want to also foster within my community, my Labia Lounge community, a sort of relationship where people do feel like they can get in touch with me and share their thoughts or their ideas or add their input, because sometimes the topics that we talk about are really funny and entertaining and sort of silly, and sometimes they're really chunky and potentially uncomfortable or edgy for people. And I never pretend to be, a faultless, flawless expert on anything. I'm learning as I go. And I think this sort of episode and last episode is a really good example of that happening in real time for you to enjoy. If it wasn't already obvious, you will kind of need to listen to the previous episode for any of this to make sense and have context for that. And it's just going to launch into some voices where, I've kind of cut any irrelevant bits out. And so sometimes it may feel a little bit abrupt or disjointed. But I sent Chloe's voicey about their thoughts to Toey as well. So some of his voices are sort of responding to what was in that And then it sort of goes to just he and I going back and forth and him responding to my thoughts. Anyway, it's been a bit of a nightmare to edit. So I hope it checks out still for you guys. Hey gang, just before we jump into this episode, I wanted to offer you an opportunity to access my new mini course for free before I start charging for it in future. It's for people with vulvas and it's quick to complete. It's all about demystifying the female body and pleasure anatomy and getting some basic fundamentals to understand your body better. It's called Pussy Pleasure Secrets, Your Roadmap to Bedroom Bliss. You can grab it on the freebies page of my website or in the show notes. It's a great little free resource to kind of dip your toe in or act as a bit of a taster for my work. So if you've ever been curious about this sort of thing and you just don't know where to start, or you want a really quick, easy, accessible, non-threatening way to get the ball rolling and start working on this stuff, this is a great place to start.
I feel like there's a kind of racism that's harmful, and there's a kind of racism that just makes you look stupid. And I feel like I would like to be at liberty to slightly push the boundaries at my own expense, not if it's at the expense of other people. And yeah, I don't know. The thing that seemed to be racist about it all, it really didn't seem that racist to me. I don't feel like you were saying all people who are Asian are good at massage. I think you were saying something, was at worst a generalization about the significance of massage in Thai culture. I don't know. I reckon Chloe would probably take more issue with me insisting on not paraphrasing the things that this woman was saying the words that she was saying, which I don't feel is racist either. And also I was sort of wondering, because while we're talking, I started talking about this woman's boobs, and then you were like, whoa, like, I'm going to have to stop you there because, like, this is, like, sort of not okay or whatever. And I was kind of like, I didn't really understand what you were talking about, because I was just talking about how I liked her boobs and what her boobs were like. And you were like, you just got your back up. And I was sort of, I don't really understand why. And like, I'm not naive to some sort of, you seem to be responding as though I was saying that, like, there is a certain kind of tit that is the ideal tit or something like that, which is not what I was saying and not what it even seemed like I was saying. So I don't know. Well, to me, it didn't seem like that's what I was saying. So I was kind of like, oh, is Freya just a bit stoned right now? Or like having her own kind of reaction to any talk of bodies when I felt like what I was saying was completely innocuous. And I don't think that it really doesn't need to be harmful for anyone to talk about what kind of body they like. I don't feel like that contravenes a healthy discourse on body positivity and, beauty being for everyone. For me, to be saying, especially in the context of that story, which is where I was saying that I generally prefer boobs that are quite small. This woman had boobs that were quite big and I liked them, which is what I was saying. I don't know what you were hearing, but I kind of felt like your reaction was weird. And I don't know. I'm interested to know if you've listened back to it, how that part came across to you this time around. Yeah, because I didn't really understand what the problem was. I just kind of acquiesced in the end. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm not gonna like double down on this during podcast recording. I'm just gonna go, okay, and we'll just move on. Because, we didn't need for it to get like messy and weird or anything. But if we weren't recording, that would have been like, what exactly is your problem? Why can't I say what I'm saying?
Hello, precious. So, I listened to your podcast today. Thank you also for trusting me to listen before it goes out. I think absolutely fucking yes. Put it out there, especially with the ending. I think it's beautiful. I think the way it came about is just so natural. And also kind of lifts the veil on your thinking process. So I think that's a very vulnerable and very real way for it to get, I was going to say exposed, but I mean, I feel like in the conversation, it kind of exposed, not your weakness, but like it exposed your vulnerabilities. You know, you kind of got caught off guard. And I think that's a really beautiful way to bring that to light. In regards to the other stuff, I think all of the stuff around, you know, him describing her body, the way you handled it was just fucking magic. To listen to that and to be like, wow, like this is how, like, number one, it's kind of stunning that men kind of can't see how their actions and their way of thinking and their way of describing feminine bodies could be a bit fucked still. And so I think hearing you interject and also hearing
Toey's
receptiveness is really, I guess, heartwarming. Like, it could be a very, like, dicey situation, but I think the way you handled it made it feel really comforting. You know, you saying what was coming up for you, like, in real time, I think was a really beautiful thing. So I wouldn't scrub any of that. The only thing I feel weird about his talk about Asian women and also like doing the accent, I found that a bit like, whoa, I think that is probably racist, only because I feel like there's an inherent power difference. And it just kind of feels like punching down. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's above board to do an American accent. It's above board to do, you know, English, Canadian, whatever, any kind of colonizing nation. But I feel like maybe taking on the colonized or maybe taking on the accent of, because it immediately others. Do you know what I mean? It's like your accent is default and you taking theirs on, you know, I don't know. I don't think it's above board. But that's the only thing that I'd like, yeah, maybe not include. As you say, you kind of like everything to be rough as it is and navigate that with your audience. So yeah, I don't know. Those are my thoughts. It was a really beautiful listen. Yeah, I was listening, I was like, I can't believe you just fell in love with a sex worker. Like, whose job it is to make you feel like there are so many endorphins in your body right now, my love. Like, of course you feel like you're in love with her. It was interesting to, like, hear that, you know, an experience that I imagine is just one of many in her day has kind of had this very profound impact in somebody else's life and, like, potentially could be categorized as some kind of, like, I'm sure it was a loving exchange, but to kind of, you know, really muse on that interaction afterwards, it's so interesting. I think having done, like, bits of sex work myself, it's interesting that is what somebody else can walk away from what you view as, like, a monetary exchange.
I still don't feel like me describing her body was in any way wrong. I don't see how that was in any way wrong, and I'd like you to explain that to me because it's just I just don't see how. Like, I can understand how someone who doesn't like their own body might find it hard to hear someone describing a body that's different to theirs and idealizing it. But that's not the same thing as body shaming. And And in the context of what I was saying, which was me speaking about how I generally have one sort of preference, and this woman's body was not within that preference, but how I found myself really liking it is ultimately a positive message about just finding any kind of body beautiful. So I don't really agree with that, and I'd like for you to explain that to me, because I don't really feel that criticism is valid. And I also feel like what Chloe's saying about doing the voice and stuff, I don't really feel like that checks out either, because I wasn't making fun of her voice. I was just saying the words that she said in the way that she said them, and the way she described that as punching down doesn't really check out, because it wasn't punching in any direction. Just like if she was American and I did an American accent, it wouldn't be punching up. It simply wouldn't be punching. It's just telling the story. So I can see how, for someone who's highly sensitive to that, it might seem like it's racist. But I feel like that's a pretty unexamined way of looking at just people doing accents. I think it's pretty clear in the way that I talk about my experience with her that I don't think she's less than me, and I don't disrespect her. In fact, I respect her immensely. And I wasn't making fun of her voice by impersonating it. And in fact, I feel like classing it as an impersonation misses the mark as well. I was simply saying what she said. So I don't really agree with Chloe's criticisms, but I'm glad that she ultimately is even in the places where it's a bit shaky, it's still valid. So yeah, cool.
And then just for posterity, I'll mention that Max then texted, "Oh, whoops, I misgendered Chloe a few times in there. Sorry about that," because Chloe is non-binary and their pronouns are they, them. So I just wanted to check that in there.
In any case, I have my own views on what is and is not racist, and I can appreciate how it doesn't always align with what other people think, especially not white people. And I'm pretty happy to wear that anyway, because I don't feel like it's ignorance. I don't feel like it comes from a place of ignorance. I feel like it comes from a place of my own interpretation of what prejudice is, and when it's harmful. And I don't feel like I need to toe some sort of societal line with that, only when it's socially wise to do so. Otherwise, I make my own decisions with that sort of thing. And I don't see that as being racist. And I don't see doing the voice as being racist. So, yeah, I'm happy to cop that, especially maintaining anonymity on a podcast. I don't mind if some people think that I'm whack. I guess I'm more concerned about how it reflects on you. So if you're comfortable with it, I guess I can just be your sort of fuckhead friend who you don't necessarily endorse the actions of, and that's still valuable content. So yeah, but that's interesting. It's interesting to be in this position and be like, nah, I just don't agree. I think that there's very direct, very harmful forms of racism in this world. And me quoting an Asian person verbatim for the sake of telling a story accurately is not racist, and to me in many ways feels like, and my intent was to honor her in doing that. It wasn't about making fun of her. it wasn't about ridiculing Asian people or people who speak English as like a second or third language or whatever. And I don't really think it seems that way either. I think you'd have to be hypervigilant and hypersensitive to see it that way.
To this little one, I just want to kind of insert a few thoughts in here because I didn't say it at the time in the voices. I got carried away talking about the body stuff. But I guess in my mind, I get what Toey is saying. But also the people that are the victims of racism or have sort of been on the receiving end of prejudice and internalized racism and very subtle forms of racism, as well as overt forms their entire lives. These are the people that have to be hypervigilant, and they've been hardwired to be hypervigilant and sensitive to this because they're constantly copying it in all different forms. And so I just wanted to kind of interject and be like, yep, I get that, but it's also quite easy as just a pretty standard white heterosexual male to say, like, I think this is fine. It would only be sensitive people and hypervigilant people that would get up in arms about it. And I'm just sort of like, yeah, well, those hypersensitive, hypervigilant people are that way for a reason. And often it is due to living in this sort of soup of racism their entire lives. And I kind of feel like it's the water we're swimming in sometimes, where we don't even recognize or realize that. And that was kind of the point of what I was making when I brought it up at the time, was like, I feel like this is racist. And even though we can't figure out why, or we don't understand why, it's because we're white and because we haven't lived with racism in the same way that a lot of people have. So just want to acknowledge that, but really happy to hear anyone's thoughts on this, because I'm always down to learn, and it's a fascinating topic. And at the same time, like, just thinking about the lens through which Toey is looking at this, like, he's come from a background where there's a lot of pretty privileged white activist-y advocate types that do get their knickers in a twist over every tiny little thing, and it's almost like they're just looking for a fight, like they're waiting to be offended and they're waiting to just virtue signal by defending the marginalized. And that can be, that can be cool and all, but I think where Toey's coming from is like he's kind of pretty sick of that like hyper vigilant approach that's coming from white people that have just chosen to identify as activists and make that a big part of their kind of identity and the way they move in the world. Whereas I think maybe he's missing the mark, or missing that there are actually a whole heap of people that are hypervigilant for very, very valid reasons, and, would have every right to be a bit annoyed by something like this, even if it's well-intentioned, because they're probably not annoyed at him specifically. They're annoyed at this sort of like systemically enabled, very, very deep-rooted, insidious and subtle climate of racism that they have to live in, where people like us just don't fucking get it and say shit like this. So those are just my thoughts, though. So now we'll just jump back to my responses in my conversation with Chloe.
And also started gaslighting myself, because I was like, wait, maybe there is nothing wrong with that. What is it about that I don't like? Why? How can I give him like a better explanation than I did in the moment of like why that doesn't sit well with me and what I had a problem with? And so, yeah, I was just going to like wait until you listened and gave me your thoughts before I like responded to him about that, because I was starting to like feel a bit uncertain and be like, oh, maybe it is just like my own sexual shame, and it's actually fine to describe someone's physique, and maybe other listeners wouldn't care and they'd be like, oh, Freya's being a prude. Like I was starting to kind of second guess myself and just sort of not sure how to explain what exactly about stuck in my craw.
Yeah, I think it's just that objectification thing and like including unnecessary details about someone's like physical assets, I suppose. And his argument was like, well, he was like trying to say like usually he doesn't like big boobs. He likes quite small boobs, but hers were quite big and he was still into them anyway, sort of thing. And I'm like, yeah, cool. Like, it doesn't really matter. You're not like a fucking, it's that heroism of like, well, I'm actually usually into smaller breasts, which is less conventional, and so go me. But like, I was into like he's kind of into all sorts of stuff depending on the mood, and I guess he felt like that was a relevant detail. But then as soon as he started like going into describing nipples, I was just like, nah, man, like I'm fucking triggered by this because I feel like I took so many years to overcome my self-consciousness and self-loathing about my breast size and in particular my nipples. And I got fucking teased about that. Like, you know, like I feel like if and you know, from talking to so many fucking people with breasts, like a lot of people don't like their breasts, feel self-conscious about them, don't like their nipples, you know, like really, really critical about their boobs and their nips. And so I just thought, regardless of whether you're describing something in like a glowing light, it's still going to alienate people that don't have breasts falling in that category that you're describing, and it's going to fucking feel like it's objectifying other people who are falling into that category and like trigger this kind of like pick me like response in them where they're like, oh yay, like I fall into that category, my breasts are like that, and then they're gonna maybe feel icky that they felt chuffed about that, because at the end of the day it's just a fucking physical characteristic that no one can control or help. And I don't like the idea that, you know, him describing it would make anyone feel uncomfortable. And I was feeling uncomfortable just listening to it. And so I thought, well, probably other people will be fucking too. And I just don't like the idea of giving a fucking white man a microphone on my fucking platform to describe like a woman's sexual organs in like a hyper detailed way. It just feels gross and like, yeah, like total like locker room chat. And it's not like it was all boastful or whatever, but it was still just focusing on the physical too much for my liking. I was like, this is not a relevant detail. This isn't really enhancing the story for anyone other than perhaps another bloke listening to this being like, ooh, that sounds hot. Like no woman, well, I mean, fuck, maybe I'm out of touch. I don't know. But I don't think any of my listeners would be listening to that being like, yeah, give me more details about her nipples. You know, the only reason they would be thinking that is if they wanted to hear what a guy liked in a nipple so that they could compare theirs to that. Because so many fucking clients of mine are always so concerned about like what guys like, what men prefer in labia and nipples. And like they're always like trying to get reassurance or confirmation that they're attractive and that they fall into a category that like men are going to be into and stuff. And so I just didn't like it. I didn't like it. So I don't know, I guess I'll try and explain that to him. But thank you. This has been really helpful, and I do feel bolstered in my intuition that you know, that just didn't sit well with me and therefore probably wouldn't sit well with my particular listener base.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough conversation because I think when you said that, you know, you feel icky about it, like that's kind of all that matters. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of almost like it doesn't really matter what his intention was, because at the end of the day, your takeaway is, I don't feel good about that. So it's kind of up to him to understand why. And yeah, I was thinking about the objectification thing. It's just going to make them kind of check their own body or like check their own kind of sexual relevance or whatever. Like comparison in that point isn't helpful at all. And also I think the locker room thing is like, yeah, we probably know that those details get mentioned. I think people want to think that men don't actually discuss bodies in that way. And it's kind of disheartening to think that, like, someone's going to describe, you know, an older woman's skin texture or, like, the effect gravity has had on her body. Like, it's kind of a bit like, whoa, I really thought that we would be talking about more meaningful things. Like, if someone has slept with me and they're talking about me to their friends, I want them to be like, this person as a whole package. So I think with talking about his experience, it's like, fine, we want the details of, like, what you felt and what you experienced in that moment, but it's a bit intense to hyperfixate on tiny, meaningless details. It kind of made me think about, like, objectification theory and this particular aspect which relates more to, like, film and photography and stuff, but it's kind of this idea of, like, in a lot of film and a lot of, like, advertising and stuff, we would zoom in on, like, one particular aspect of a woman. Like, often, like, her head would be missing, you know what I mean? It would be like a close-up of, like, her chest and, like, how attractive her, like, collarbones are or whatever, you know, or like her breasts or whatever. And there's this kind of idea that, like, women are spliced, and, like, it's kind of mirrors the way that women, like, zone in on particular aspects of insecurity. And I think that in, like, highlighting one area of a woman's body, like, oh my God, her ass was so fucking amazing, or this, kind of is so demoralizing. And no wonder people hyperfixate on aspects of their body and don't see themselves as a whole, when that is mirrored by men talking about, oh, you should have seen her tits, I really liked them because they were big. Yeah. Anyway, good luck with the conversation. It's intense.
Hey, baby babes. Sorry to interrupt. I just had to pop my head into the lounge here and mention another virtual lounge that I'd love you to get around. It's the Labia Lounge Facebook group that I've created for listeners of the potty to mingle in. There you'll find extra bits and bobs like freebies, behind the scenes, or discounts for offerings from guests who have been interviewed on the podcast. There'll also be, hopefully, inspiring, thought-provoking conversations and support from a community of labial legends like yourself. My vision for this is that it becomes a really supportive, educational, and hilarious resource for you to have more access to me and a safe space to ask questions you can't ask anywhere else. So head over to the links in the show notes or look up the Labia Lounge group in Facebook, and I'll see you in there. And now, back to the episode. And now this is me responding to Toey.
Yeah, so with regards to the body stuff, I think the overarching feeling, or the underlying feeling, either or, is that it's unnecessary detail, and it's about, like, physical characteristics of a woman where, like, coming from, like, a white man, you know, and the fact that, like, I know my sort of rough listener base and the demographic, that they're mostly women, and they're sort of picking up what I'm putting down with regards to trying to step away from being hyper fixated on their bodies and their boobs and their nipples and how attractive they might be to men. And, like, so many clients that I have are, like, so concerned about what's attractive for men and what, like, whether they fit into a category of attractive or normal or sexy or whatever, and they're incredibly, incredibly self-conscious. Yeah, and so, you know, based on, like, the conversations that I have with women and my own experience, it feels really off-brand and detrimental to, like, give, like, a white male a microphone on my platform, and, you know, kind of let him describe in unnecessary detail sort of sexual organs of a woman, because, like, we already think too much about that shit and feel too self-conscious and too insecure and inadequate in so many ways. And so regardless of whether, like, it was being said in a really complimentary way. It's like a little bit too close to like men's locker room talk where like you're describing all this stuff. It's like I don't think women would benefit from hearing that men are even kind of fixating on those parts of the body at all, let alone sort of, I guess like feeling it's noteworthy enough to describe in detail. And I know like as part of your like storytelling process or whatever, but it was like, well, if it's making me feel uncomfortable, then it's definitely going to be making other listeners feel uncomfortable and making them think about their breasts or their nipples and kind of compare themselves. And it doesn't really matter if they like fitted into the same category as what you were describing or not. Like either way, it didn't feel helpful or necessary to the narrative. And it felt like putting too much emphasis on a physical characteristic that like, women have historically been made to sort of hyperfixate on and feel inadequate about in a number of different ways. And I just don't want to encourage that. Like, not that there's anything wrong with describing that. And like, I do that in my private life to friends, but I wouldn't ever do that on the podcast because I don't want it to be a platform where that sort of thing, like I just think it can alienate people and make people feel uncomfortable or make them feel self-conscious or, insecure and, or just a little bit grossed out because like there is something really like, it just felt like, objectification. And even if it's like in a positive light, it's still objectifying, and sexualizing like a woman, and it's coming from a man. And like, even, though the context is like she is a sex worker and that's what you're there for. And so, of course, you're paying attention to those details and you're wanting to enjoy them and savor them. Yeah, it didn't feel essential to the story and it felt a bit icky because I know that I would feel objectified and self-conscious hearing that. And I didn't want to remind women anymore that like men are focusing on those details that are just around their appearance, which is a part of them that they can't help, and also are like constantly being told or encouraged to like change by either boob jobs or nip jobs or fucking injections or this or that. Like I think like anything to do with like beauty standards and whatever, like I don't really want to give men a microphone to talk about that on my platform. It's not really conducive to what I'm trying to create in the sort of like safe space and like very non-judgmental container. Not saying you were doing any judging or any of that. Like this isn't about you. I'm just saying the way that I felt hearing it is real, and whether you believe you were right or wrong, it doesn't matter. Like female-bodied people already, Chloe and I like heard that and were like, ooh, no, that doesn't sit well with me. That doesn't make me feel safe, doesn't make me feel good, doesn't make me think about nice things with regards to my own body, and so it's like, whether it's like okay for you to do that or not, doesn't matter. I didn't want it happening on my podcast and I didn't want to expose my listeners to like gratuitous amounts of detail about a hypersexualized part of a woman's body that sort of was a little bit too objectifying. And that's where I'm coming from with that. And I think that that's completely fair enough. I think that, you can get all defensive about it if you want, but like I'm pretty kind of in touch with the sorts of women I work with and therefore a lot of the kinds of people that would listen to the podcast. And I think that most of them would have felt a little bit like, not stoked on it, because it's like, if it was like, I don't know, an erotic podcast, or we were reading erotica, or it was meant to be like, okay, we're telling a sexy story for the sake of people getting like painting a real picture and getting really like horny based on like what's being described and everything, then sure. But like that's not my podcast. So I think just like didn't feel very appropriate or necessary. At the same time, it's like I'm really curious to hear how other people, like Chloe really enjoyed that entire dialogue and the way that it was handled by both of us. So, like, I think that in itself is valuable because we both have different opinions and coming from completely different places, being different genders. And so it's valuable to, like, have that dialogue kind of unfold organically the way that it did. And I think there's something really, like, cool about that. So, like, I want to leave it in anyway. And I don't think, like, you know, Chloe even said, like, it doesn't come off like you're a dish or you're a fucking objectifying male. Like, that's not how it comes off at all. I don't think there's anything wrong with any of it. And I think it's valuable that, like, I was like, oh, I'm feeling uncomfortable in this moment. And I tried to explain why, couldn't quite put my finger on it, but tried to. And you were like, okay. Yeah, okay, you know, and so I think that in itself is worth keeping in. Yeah, because that is on brand. That's exactly the kind of thing that I want to, like, encourage is, like, having crunchy conversations and pulling people up if something makes you feel a bit weird or uncomfortable, and then having a dialogue around that, and then that person being receptive to hearing how it made you feel, and then changing tact, you know, like, yeah, I think that's cool.
So yeah, I fully concede that that if it makes people feel weird and you don't want it on the podcast, then it shouldn't be there. Like that's just true. That's just true. So I agree in that sense. Still take a few issues with all of that, which is not really sure why me being a white male has anything to do with it, firstly. Secondly, you didn't tell me any of that coming into it, and I think you should have, probably, because it was framed to me as a candid conversation, and I think that it being a candid conversation gave rise to that moment of me being like, oh, and her tits were like yada yada, and you were like, oh, like we don't need to know that, and I was like, oh, you know, I'm just like, you know, and you're like, yeah, but still. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, let's not. So in that sense, the candid conversation thing was satisfied, and that's good. But you did frame it that way to me. So I suppose if I'm defensive, it's kind of like, well, like you wanted my story and you didn't tell me anything about what I should and should not include. So, yeah, I guess I just don't feel super responsible for that.
So amidst this voicey, there was a bit of a flurry of messages just in text form. So I'll just read those out because it sort of clarifies some things. Basically, I just said, well, to the whole, you know, why does it matter that you're white? I just said, well, you know, she isn't white. And so there's an inherent power dynamic there. And then also, I didn't know I had to pre-frame the episode because I had zero idea what was coming or how you would tell the story, or what it was even going to be about. So I couldn't have known. And then Toey was like, oh my God, yeah, totally. That's really fair. I kind of forgot you had no idea what we were going to talk about. And I also, I just said, just to be clear, like you're not being attacked or being called the bad guy. It's more just that I have to moderate the public content of my platform. And I totally know that I can also be a bit locker roomy or like, you know, shallow in some ways. So I really get that you would have thought that was all fair game. And then Toey was like, I just felt like I was hearing a tone from you that was more personal than professional, which seemed unreasonable given what comes out of your mouth sometimes, which might just be me in my defensiveness. And then I said, I do the same thing, but I never do it on my pod or online because it would be damaging. My vanity and my preferences are my guilty secret, and I'd never publicly talk about them because it would make people feel less than or othered. And yeah, Toey just said, oh, I might have missed the point a little by forgetting that you didn't know I was going to tell you about sex or go into detail in this story. And just to be clear, and sort of clear my name a little bit, around what comes out of my mouth. Toby's sort of referring to, it's definitely not out of character for me to sort of hear about a friend starting to hook up with someone and me being like, oh, what's his dick like? Or, how's the sex? Or, for me to sort of describe something that I'm really attracted to or that I like and, joke about the fact that I've kind of been ruined for regular guys and dad bods alike due to, the last person I dated being a fucking Adonis. And so things like that aren't out of the ordinary for me to talk about with my friends in private, but I guess, it's a little guilty pleasure. It's like I would never stand by talking about that stuff online because I don't want people to compare themselves to what I'm saying I'm attracted to or whatever. And I absolutely know that it's problematic. I'm not denying that. But what happens behind closed doors is that's my business. And it's also, not to say that my preferences or my shallowness around certain aesthetics that I'm more into than others are like sort of fixed. Once I get to know someone, that attraction can develop and my preferences change depending on who I'm jazzing or who I'm into, and all of that is quite surface level. And so I'm not completely ruled by it. So that's just clarifying. I also feel like I kind of talk a lot about how the way that dating apps have kind of changed how we sort through people based on mostly just aesthetics. It gets quite easy to start becoming, having quite a critical eye and just being like, nope, next. Whereas, when I meet someone in person, it's far less about the aesthetics. So anyway, just felt the need to explain myself there. But, we all do it. We all do it a little bit. And I think it came about, as I think I go on to say in some of these voices, from this attempt in my teenage years to kind of do what the boys were doing and take some power back and objectify them just as much as they were objectifying us, and, sexualize them or talk about, their dicks or their bodies or whatever in a way that at the time was kind of the only version of female empowerment I knew how to access, and was pretty misguided and pretty misogynistic. But again, like I didn't have the awareness then, and it sort of just became a bit of a bit, it was sort of a funny thing that I could do with my friends. And it's sort of what was modeled in the media and in movies and stuff as well, with the kind of like your Sex in the City and having a hoe phase and sort of using men's bodies or men for sex as well to take the power back, which I don't really stand by these days, but it was all we had. And so I think there's echoes of that still kind of carry on in certain friendships, and Toey and I do have a very kind of close relationship where we talk about those sorts of details sometimes. And so I think that's where Toey sort of put his foot in it, was just assuming we were just having a regular old chat, and it it didn't really fly for my professional, not facade, because it's not a facade, but it's a version of me, and what I want to, my professional facing platform. Another sort of interesting topic that I've wanted to cover on the podcast, so maybe this is a good catalyst, is like the whole double standards thing, where like sometimes the sort of detail I go into or the things that I talk about from my sex life or whatever with certain friends, I would be mortified if a guy was talking about me like that. Not because it's not in a positive light, but just the amount of like personal details and things like I'm pretty shocking. And, I sort of feel like, oh, it can't harm them. It's just with a close friend and, it's blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, if I knew a guy was doing that, I'd probably be really outraged. And I think about that a bit. It's like, oh, for some reason, I think that it's, on some level, I think that it's okay that I do it because I'm a woman and they're men and they can take it. But that in itself is, problematic. And when I actually reflect on it, I don't really back that. So it's interesting because like we all have these things that are like not particularly functional or healthy, but also maybe not a big enough deal to kind of look at and work on right now, and have become so habituated. So anyway, that's just a little side venture. And we'll get back to the voices now.
In terms of what you reflect on your podcast, like I understand there's a line that you need to toe and that you toe it well for the sake of it being valuable to your listeners and not being harmful. But I feel like I just kind of want you to agree that that it's not my fault for going there, and that I wasn't to know that it was off limits because of how you talk to me about men's bodies, and because I was invited to have a candid conversation with you. So I guess I feel defensive because I really don't like being sort of cast in that light or something when, like my beauty standards are not as locked to societal expectations as yours are. And so I just feel like it's unfair for me to be. I feel like I've sort of got my back against the wall a bit, where I'm like, hey, why do I feel like the bad guy here? I don't think that I should have to feel like the bad guy. Which I get is also kind of not what you're saying. You're saying that it's not right for your podcast, and I can respect that. So yeah, I just don't like feeling like I'm being told that I'm, and I don't even know what the fuck objectifying means. If seeing a body that you like and there being reasons why, and knowing those reasons is considered objectification, like, isn't that just being attracted to someone? And don't you do the exact same thing? And doesn't everyone? In the context of how I was explaining my experience, I feel like I gave a snapshot of the person that I met so much more than I offered some sexualized image of what her body looked like. So I don't really know what objectification means to you, if that's objectification, what I did. But so we're slightly talking in circles here. I don't want to be some sort of, I'm not trying to clap back at you, but I am a bit defensive just because I just feel like you should have told me if you didn't want to hear stuff like that. I just feel like you should have told me. But the way that things went is also really valuable. It was like a conversation in real time about me kind of pivoting and adjusting the way I was talking about it under your guidance. And that's really good too. And in many ways, like, maybe more valuable than if I had come on and I was like towing this line in this way and I just didn't say anything that you needed to pull me up on, It's kind of more, it's sort of the whole point, I think, in many ways, about there being a discussion rather than it being some people know and those people are good and some people don't, and those people fuckheads, you know. Instead, we were in the place that society needs to be in, where if you don't know, there's room for you to be educated and brought in, where you won't be shamed for not knowing in the first place. And once you're on board, then we're all good and we can continue. So yeah, it's good. And like, up to you. Like, if you feel like it was a bit cooked for your listener base, then you can just remove it as well. It sounds like both you and Chloe, despite how it was like a bit unsavory to your ears, ultimately feel that it was a positive interaction. So that's good. But yeah, I think I'm just like a bit like, I just don't like the tone that you're coming at me with, where you're like, you know, I feel like you're sort of talking to me like I'm, like locker room talk. Like, what the fuck? Like, I don't know. That's just really, that's not me. At least it's not me most of the time. And it's, you know, and it's actually you so much more than it is me when we're having our normal, just you and me conversations. So, I guess I feel a little bit like I'm being spoken to from you up on your high horse. And if that's not what's happening, then I can trust you if you say that's not what's happening. This is me kind of reacting in real time and trying to curb myself and trying to understand in real time. So, like, you know, please forgive me that if I'm being unreasonable, because like I'll come around and, like, you know, it'll be sweet, but I just don't want to be spoken to like I'm some kind of toxic dude when I was just telling the story I was just saying what went on for me. Yeah, anyway, sorry for the long rant. I hope that sounds reasonable. And sorry if I'm being reactive. I'm just sort of talking it through for myself as well. Yeah.
Excuse this quick interruption. I'm shamelessly seeking reviews and 5-star ratings for the potty because, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, it's pretty fab, and the more people who get to hear it, the more people I can help with it. Reviews and ratings actually do make a big difference to this little independent podcaster. And it's really easy to just quickly show your support by taking that simple act of either leaving 5 stars for the show on Spotify, or even better, writing a written review and leaving 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts. Or if you're a real overachiever, you can do them both. That would be mad. If you're writing a review, though, just be sure to use G-rated words, because despite the fact that this is a podcast about sexuality, words like sex can be censored and your review won't make it through the gates. Lame. Anyway, I would personally recommend doing that right now while you remember, just to get on top of it and let me know you're with me on this journey. Thanks, gang. Enjoy the rest of the epi.
Let's finish listening to your thing. Yeah, no, like, I'm sorry if my tone seemed whatever. And I guess it's this interesting thing where, like, it's like that extra element of knowing it's being recorded and people are going to listen to it means that the way I was receiving your story was tinged with that awareness. And so it'd be interesting if you were telling me that story not on record. I probably wouldn't have pulled you up at all about the boob stuff. I would have been like, oh yeah, give me more detail. Because, like, you're right, I'm like fucking so locker room talky, and that's also sort of internalized misogyny / attempts at feminism and empowerment that got sort of rooted in there when I was younger, and felt like I had to fucking play by the men's rules and do it just as bad as them in order take back some power or something. So if they can talk about our bodies and we can talk about theirs and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, fine if women do it. And I have sort of talked about that double standard on the podcast before. But anyway, that's a different thing. But basically, like, I'm definitely not judging or attacking you or saying that you're wrong and I'm fine, even though I do that. Like, no. I'm so aware that I do that. But it's like, as soon as I'm aware that other people will be listening, I'm automatically receiving the information through a different lens. And like, it did trigger my boob stuff, which it probably wouldn't normally, because I know you and I don't give a fuck, like, you know, whatever. But it was, I'm like extra sensitive to like all the different people that might be listening and might receive that in certain ways. Because I feel like a little bit of, I felt like I was an extension of my listener base because I was hearing it for the first time, like at the time as well. And so I felt like protective of them because they don't know you and they don't know that you're not a toxic bro. And like they, you know, they would get the idea, but like they don't know you like I do and they didn't have as much context for the story. And so I was kind of like coming at it from like, yeah, just listening to it from that lens. And then I think the tone you're picking up on in these voices was a little bit of like, hang on, mate, don't get defensive and come at me when I'm someone who's in a woman's body with experience as a sex worker and as a woman and as someone who has breasts that I would not like to be described in detail, especially on a podcast, even if it was with a glowing, glowing reviews, and would feel quite objectified by that. And I've been in positions where I've felt objectified by clients when I was doing sex work for men, and that was triggering as well. Even though you are not at all like those men or whatever, like, yeah, it was just a bit like when you got defensive and were like, I don't think I did anything wrong, and I don't think I think you were just stoned and having a moment. And I was like, what? That feels really invalidating of my experience, which is actually like so much more informed of like the female experience and the sex worker experience than you could possibly ever be. So like, stay in your lane and like don't get defensive right now. Listen to me and take it on board. And like, yeah, so I was a little bit like, hang on, mate. And that's because of all of my fucking trauma around men. It's not even really to do with you. It's just that as soon as someone starts trying to, it's not like you're someone who mansplains things, and it's not like you're someone who does any of that toxic mask stuff, but I'm already quite sort of quick to, I guess, try to carve out, how do I phrase it? Like sort of, oh fuck, I've tied myself in knots now. But, just stand my ground about something and be like, please don't question that. Like, but, and I get that you just wanted an explanation and whatever. And I also thought this might be, I was like, I don't like his tone. I don't fucking like this at all. And I was like, is it because I'm listening to it in 1.5 speed and it sounds really curt, the way that he's just like being like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think I did anything wrong, and I want you to explain to me. It was very like, you explain to me, do the emotional and mental labor for me, even though you're in the kind of slightly more not marginalized, like oppressed group here, being a woman and having done sex work or whatever. And that kind of got my back up a little bit. But then I was like, yeah, it's probably just because I'm listening to it in 1.5 speed. And I was like, whenever I talk about this stuff, you get a little bit like, not aggressive, but a little bit like, I have that tone like I've got now. Like it just, and it's nothing to do with you. It's just when I talk about these topics, they're topics that I've thought about and talked about and lived for so long that I'm just like very easy easily sort of exasperated or frustrated or just like fucking man, you know? And it's not about you. It's not about you, but the tone you're picking up on is coming from, I guess, just feeling like I have to fucking explain myself and explain stuff to men that I would never have to explain to a woman, or that I feel like I shouldn't have to, you know. I guess it's such a complex thing, and it's definitely nothing personal at all. And I think it's really valuable that we're able to have these combos. And fuck, wouldn't it be epic if all of this was on the podcast, and if I had been able to better explain in the moment, or if you had felt safe to further inquire on the spot. And yeah, I think super valuable stuff, and appreciate your level-headedness with it all, and compassion and willingness to like see my perspective. And I'm keen to fucking put this episode out.
I think I was a little bit like, explain it to me, which was basically like a genuine sense of inquiry. Like, I'd like to understand with a veneer of indignation. So the 1.5 speed probably exacerbated that a little bit, but there definitely was an element of like, you know, just kind of like, what, like, explain that to me, because I don't understand that. Explain that to me. When the better part of it really was like, oh, explain that to me. I'd like to know. I'd like to understand better. And yeah, it would be good to talk more about it. I mean, also, we don't have to talk more about it. Like, I can just fucking think about it a bit, and just like, you know, just acknowledging what you said about spending the time and the energy educating men thing, which is another thing I get my back up about. I'm like, I'm not men. I'm a man. I'm just me. And I only learn these things from my friends explaining them to me. Like, in terms of being able to kind of go back and forth and get into the details of it, sort of thing. I'm not a big YouTuber watcher of things. I feel like most of what I understand about society, I learn through socializing. And that's just me. And it's really unfortunate that resembles the decidedly ignorant male way of approaching these things, of forever demanding explanations that they're not really willing to listen to. So I can understand why it would be like, come on, dude. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, bottom line, it makes people feel weird about their bodies when people talk about bodies and idealized bodies that aren't like the bodies of the people who happen to be listening. Like, that's true for everyone, and especially true for people who are made to feel especially self-conscious about their bodies. And I guess that I'm kind of, you know, in a lot of ways, I feel like I project myself into some like post-gender society, which is really idealistic and not very realistic at all, because it's not what we're living in right now. Where the weirdness that I feel about my body when bodies that are deemed superior to mine are being discussed, I'm just like, yeah, we all feel that. Like, that's just something, you know, that's just kind of a fact of life or something, but it's not really the same experience that you're having, where your body image stuff is just so pronounced compared to mine for you know, for all these reasons. You know, women's bodies just being under a microscope all the time, and men just being able to kind of coast by and, you know, get kind of fat and like just be kind of gross and somehow hold their own in the dating pool. Yeah, so it's different. And I feel like that's kind of a big thing for me at the moment in my own personal inner dialogue about this shit, is that maybe I'm kind of breaking down a gender, what for me is like an imaginary line between genders in my brain for my own identity, and living in a bubble where that can sort of be feasible in some ways, not always, but in some ways between myself and the people that I know. It's just not reflected outside of this moment, outside of my innermost circle. And and like that's where so much of your history is, your entire upbringing. It wasn't happening in this squishy little reality that I live in. So, I need to contemplate the difference between objectification and physical attraction, because I feel like the two get conflated a lot. My working understanding is that objectification is physical attraction without recognition of someone's humanity. And I suppose that's where I get caught up, because I feel like often people bring that to the table themselves when they hear about someone talking about physical attraction. How do you describe being physically attracted to someone without objectifying them? Like, what actually is the difference? But I've probably got to stop sending voice memos back and forth in a minute. So I'm just going to listen to yours, and then I'll listen to this last one, and then I'll probably tap out and go and have a shower.
Go us. Proud of us. I'm like slightly concerned I've just turned into a fucking content robot that just is now like, everything is a content opportunity. Oh my God, content. But like, fuck, this would be an episode of its own, because I've also sent a bunch of voices back and forth with Chloe, unpacking it. Hopefully, Hannah will have some shit to say. Like, it's juicy. This stuff's juicy, and it's good because we're all learning as we go. But there's an episode Hannah and I did ages ago, a Sand in My Clam episode, that like you might find interesting to listen to, just because I kind of forget that a lot of guys have blind spots around this sort of thing. Well, probably most people do. Hannah and I did an episode on like breasts and objectification and like small breast, both of us growing up and like having small breasts and things like this. And we just sort of did like an informal episode where we explored that and chatted about it. I can't fully remember exactly what was in it, but it could be like interesting for you to listen to, and also like would give you a bit more of I guess like understanding of where I'm coming from. Like personally, I don't know, it might not be interesting to you, but if all this stuff's interesting to you, it could be cool. So let me know if you want me to flick you that one.
Hey, me again. If you'd like to support the potty and you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, I want to mention that you can buy some really dope merch from the website and get yourself a Labia Lounge tote, tee, togs. Yep, you heard that right. I even have Labia Lounge bathers. Or a cute fanny pack if that'd blow your hair back. So if fashion isn't your passion though, you can donate to my Buy Me a Coffee donation page, which is actually called Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe tosser like that. And yes, that is my coffee order. You can do a once-off donation or an ongoing membership and sponsor me for as little as 3 fat ones a month. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and online courses that'll help you level up your sex life and relationship with yourself and others in a really big way. So every bit helps, because it ain't cheap to put out a sweet podcast into the world every week out of my own pocket. So I will be undyingly grateful if you support me and my biz financially in any of these ways. And if you like, I'll even give you a mental BJ with my mind from the lounge itself. Saucy. And I'll pop the links in the show notes. Thank you. Later. And that's it, darling hearts. Thanks for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. If you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that's a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism, and you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify, and destigmatize with this here podcast. I'm also always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, questions or guest suggestions, so feel free to get in touch via my website or over on Insta. You can also send me in TMI stories to be shared anonymously on the pod. My handle is FreyaGraf_the Labia Lounge, if my account hasn't been deleted for being too sex positive, which, is always a possibility with censorship. But just in case the chronic censorship finally does obliterate my social channels, I'd highly recommend going and joining my mailing list and snagging yourself some fun freebies for the trouble at www.freyagraf.com/freebies. Anyway, later, labial legends. See you next time.